Welcome to episode 6 of Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons. I'm Dave Levine, also known as Kilmarock on the 11 O'Clock Comics and Comic Geek Speak forums. I like to read comics and watch cartoons. I've been reading and watching off and on since the mid-70s. I don't read current comic books or watch the latest cartoons. On this episode, this episode's going to be a little different. This episode of Dave Talks Comics and Cartoons, I'm going to be talking all about what I was doing last weekend, because I've been off for a couple weeks, no episodes. Last weekend, I was up in Baltimore at Otakon. So I recorded 3 segments. The episode as a whole is going to be a little longer than the previous ones, but I recorded 3 segments, one at the end of or at the end of each day, about my day, about what I saw, what I did, etc. So, and then next week I plan on getting back to business as usual. I've already recorded a segment or 2 on stuff I've been reading. And I'll have to record something on stuff I've been watching. But, so sit back and enjoy, listen to my recollections of Otakon, and I'll see you at the end of the show. Otakon, day 1. Otakon is a big anime convention in Baltimore. This year it is August 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. And I just got back from day 1, August 9th. Spent more or less the whole day up in Baltimore. I didn't stay till the bitter end. I decided to head home a little early. So I hung out at the convention center from 8:30 until about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning till about 8 o'clock at night, something like that. So anyway, I drove up there. I only live about 30 miles from Baltimore. I drove up there and parked, a good ways, a good 3/4 of a mile from the convention center. Found a place to park, wasn't too expensive. I made the arrangements in advance. So then I walked down to the convention center. My original goal was to get there at 7, be at the convention center by 8, so I wouldn't have to wait too long in line to get my badge because I pre-registered. But I overslept, and so I got to the convention center around 8:40. I believe the registration opened at 8:30. So I had to wait in line, and there was also already a very long line. I expected I would have a half hour to 45-minute wait. It ended up being an hour and 15 minutes from the time I got in line until the time I got my badge, from 8:40 till 9:55. Originally, I wanted to go see a samurai film, which started at 9 o'clock. Well, I missed at least half of that, so I decided not to go. That was Sleepy Eyes of Death 4, Sword of Seduction. So who knows, maybe I can rent that on DVD. After that, I got nervous that maybe I'd left the lights on in my car, and there wasn't anything else to do at the time because the dealer's room wasn't open. Most of the panels didn't begin yet. The artist alley wasn't open. Those things didn't open up until like noon. So I walked back to my car to make sure that I had turned the lights off, and I had. I also dropped off the book I was reading because I finished it while I was standing in line waiting to get my badge. So I walked back to the convention center. I went to a panel. I went to see We Con, Therefore We Are, Fandom Convergence and a Critical Look at the Modern Otaku, which was a discussion, 3 guys who are, 2 of them are podcasters, one of them's more of an academic, talked about anime conventions and how they've changed over the years, and kind of theorized, the pluses and minuses of that kind of stuff. And I agreed with some of the stuff they had to say. I didn't agree with all of it. I didn't take notes, but I did try to tape it. And if my recording came out good, and the first part maybe not so great because the speakers weren't working at first, so that part may not come out so great. But hopefully it will. If it did, I will post it. After that, I had 15 minutes between the end of that panel and the beginning of a movie that I wanted to see called True Legend, which is a kung fu film, which was directed by Yunwo Ping, and featured one of the last appearances of David Carradine in film, although he wasn't a star, he just had a small role in it. Anyway, I had 15 minutes to make it from the end of the panel to the room where the movie was showing, and I basically had to walk the length of the convention center to get there. And the foot traffic was impossible. It took 25 minutes to get there. So I missed the first 10 minutes of the movie. I don't think I missed too much. I wouldn't say the movie was great. You know, if you're a kung fu enthusiast, you might like it. It reminded me in some ways of another film I saw recently. It was a Jet Li film, because part of this movie had to do with a guy standing up for, there was foreigners, in other words, white people, who'd come to China, and I believe this was set in the early 1900s, who were challenging Chinese, so they had these wrestler-type guys challenging Chinese martial artists to duels and basically killing them in the ring. And so he basically, this was part of the movie. This was like the second half of the movie. The first half of the movie had absolutely nothing to do with this. The first half of the movie had all to do with a dispute between the main character and whose name was Sue, and his adopted brother, or no, his brother-in-law. Yeah, it was his brother-in-law, and it was a decent story, but it kind of ended kind of weird. But then the movie went on, and then you had this whole other part where Sue travels with his son because his wife has been killed. And, and then there's some stuff about drunken style kung fu, and then there's this whole thing in the ring, and it's a little bit of a mess, but some of the fighting was fun, and it was fun to watch it in that environment. So, after that, I walked around for a while. That ran from about 12:30 to about 2:30. So then I went down to the dealer's room, and I walked around down there for a while. I picked up a couple manga volumes I've been meaning to buy for a while. One of them for a while. I picked up Volume 7 of Yotsuba, and it's probably been over a year, maybe even over 2 years since I bought Volume 6 of Yotsuba. And I also bought Volume 2 of One Piece because I enjoyed Volume 1. And I think I talked about that on an earlier podcast. I also bought a couple paper fans. I looked forever for fans. The only fans I saw were these huge, enormous fans that were, things that I guess they use like as props in movies as, weapons or something. But, I wandered around forever. it seemed like a half hour, 45 minutes before I finally happened across a table that had some fans, and they had some bigger fans. I bought just some paper fans, which were like $1 each, just because I wanted something to fan myself with, because I don't use the air conditioning too much, or sometimes it's just convenient to have that, especially if you're on the go. So I spent a while in there looking at stuff, looking at books. I was unable to find some of the manga I wanted. I still hold out hope that one of these days I'll run across a table that has Volume 9 of Phoenix by Osamu Tezuka. But we'll see. Because it's out of print, it costs a fortune if you try to find it anywhere. Like $50 for something that was originally like 18. And I'm a little too tight with my money to pay that much for it. Also couldn't find volume, I think it was 8 of Ikigami, The Final Limit, or something like that, which is a series, another series that I like. But I can probably find it online for a reasonable price. So after that, I finally, I had a little bit of trouble finding Artist Alley, but I finally found it. But by then it was getting close to time for a second movie that I wanted to see today, which was called Eega, which was an Indian film, which is about a guy who has a crush on a girl. He's been hitting on her for a couple years, but nothing happens. Nothing's been happening. And then he finally starts to make some progress with her when this corrupt businessman gets involved, and who also has a thing for this gal Bindu. And let's see, and Nani is the name of the main character in this movie, and the gal Bindu, who he has a crush on. But then there's a corrupt businessman whose name is Sudeep. And so Sudeep gets angry and basically kills Nani. And this is not, I'm not spoiling anything there. So the main part of the film, the crux of the film, is that Nani gets reincarnated as a fly and does what he can to make Sudeep's life a living hell. And get in touch with Bindu, the gal, who he has the crush on. And it's very melodramatic. It's probably not for everybody. I thought it was very funny. There were some scenes, some slapstick humor in there that I really liked. And the whole thing is just kind of very tongue-in-cheek. And but I thought it was a lot of fun. And if it sounds like something you might like, give it a try. If not, don't bother. So then I walked around for a little longer, just kind of wandered the halls. And the movie ended around 6:15. Then at 7 o'clock, I went to a workshop. And I thought that it was billed as a workshop, but I didn't think it was going to be a workshop. I thought it was going to be a presentation, because what it was, the title was Chin Hamaya Culture Center presents taiko drumming. So I thought it was just going to be a taiko drumming presentation, but no, it was actually a workshop. So first they did a presentation, which only lasted a few minutes, but then they actually handed out drums and showed us how to play them and taught us some dance steps, which I didn't do very good at. And then we spent an hour kind of, trying to learn these dances with the drums, where you would take a couple steps and you'd hit the drum a bunch of times, you'd take a couple more steps, and you'd turn this way, you'd turn that way, and I don't know, I had fun hitting the drum, and I had a lot of fun on the whole, and I didn't do so great with the dancing part. But it was a lot of fun. And so that ran from 7 till 8. And there's programming goes until like midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, but I decided that was about enough. Plus I hadn't eaten dinner yet, and all I had for lunch was some trail mix. So I walked a good mile and a half to, I could have caught a bus, but I chose to walk, to a restaurant called Stang of Siam, which is a Thai restaurant, and quite a ways from the convention center. And I had dinner there, and I thought it was pretty good. I had some soup. It was what was it called? Pak no or po? I'm not sure. But it was a seafood soup with lemongrass and some seafood, a little piece of shrimp, a piece of was it oyster, and a scallion or something like that, and some mushrooms. And then I had the masaman or I think that's what it's called, masaman curry with chicken, which was, and on the whole, I thought it was very good. Not the best Thai meal I've ever had, but I'd certainly be interested in going back and trying some of their other dishes. So that was about it. I walked back to my car and I drove back home. So I'd say on the whole, day one was a very good, excellent success, a great idea, and I hope tomorrow goes just as well. I've got other things lined up to do, and hopefully I'll get to them. And I'm planning to go to, well, I'll talk about that stuff tomorrow. But yeah, I'm really glad I went to. So far, so good on Otakon, and hopefully the next 2 days will be just as good. Otakon, Day 2, Saturday, August 10th. I woke up a little later than I meant to. I guess I didn't hear the alarm. And as a result, I originally was planning to go to Miss Shirley's up in Baltimore for breakfast. I've been there a few times before. But I decided not to. I wasn't sure what the line would be like. It's a kind of a popular place, and also the food's a little richer than I kind of like. I always feel like I get a lot more than I need. But so instead I just had breakfast at home and drove up to after that. There was a race up in Baltimore, and that slowed things down once I got up there. Took me, I don't know, once I got within a couple blocks of the parking lot where I was parking, it took me maybe 10 minutes to get there because the traffic was moving so slowly. So I walked down to the convention center, had no trouble getting in today. I thought there would be some kind of a line, but there wasn't. They just waved us right in. The first thing I did was I went down to the... No, I didn't. Or did I? Let's see. I got there around 9:30, I think. Yes, I got there around 9:30 and 9:45. And first thing I did was I wanted to go see a movie. Correction. No, I did go. I went to the Artist Alley first. And I wandered around Artist Alley a little bit. And, you see, now I'm confused. I can't remember if I did that before or after the movie. I may have done that later. Yeah, I think I did that later. I went to a panel on I Love the 80s, which was basically one guy's, Mike Toole, but he showed a bunch of videos and talked about animes from the 1980s that people grew up on. There's a few of them that I'd seen bits of, things like Akira and Robotech and things like that, but I'm not the most well-versed in anime, so there was a lot of stuff there that I had not seen before. Although the styles of a lot of things were similar. So that was interesting. After that, I went. I had about 15 minutes, so I went straight to back to the room where they were showing all the live-action films, and I saw another Hong Kong film. This one was called Detective D and the Mystery of the Phantom Flame, and this was set in late 7th century China. There was the first and I believe the only only woman to ever rule as emperor of China, was getting ready to ascend the throne, and they were building this huge Buddha statue, and there was problems with the construction, and this guy, Detective D, who had been sent to prison, is brought back to investigate. Sent to prison like 7 years earlier because he had led an an uprising against the Empress, or who was, I guess, a regent at that point. So they brought him back to investigate, and he was played by Andy Lau. The movie was directed by Tsui Hark, who I believe also did the Once Upon a Time in China films, among others. And there's a few other characters in there. There's a woman who works for the Empress. There's a judge who, both of them kind of work with Detective D in this investigation. And basically, bit by bit, people start getting killed off, suspects start getting killed off, and there's different things going on there. And it wasn't a great movie. It was a fun film to watch. It wasn't really a martial arts film, although there were some fight scenes in it. I'd call it more of a mystery film, more of a drama and intrigue. If that's and a historical piece. As I understand it, Detective D was a real person, and there were actually a series of novels written about him, which I believe have been translated into English, or maybe they were written in English. I'm not sure. But he was a real person who lived in the late 600s, the late 7th century. But the story itself was, as I understand, a fabrication, because the title, The Phantom Flame, has to do with the fact that people are just mysteriously bursting into flame. And whenever they get close to learning something about somebody, they end up bursting into flame. So there's all kinds of weird stuff. There's some magical stuff going on in there. Some of it's scientific. So some of it's kind of steampunk. And, I don't know, usually you think about steampunk as being like 19th century, and this is like 1,200 years before that. But it was an interesting movie. I'm glad I saw it. And it's got some really good fight scenes in it. So if that's your kind of thing, you might enjoy it. After that, I went to lunch. It was around 1 o'clock, and I walked up to Mekong Delta Cafe, which is maybe a half mile and uphill from the convention center. But it's a really good place. I go there almost every year, whether it's during Baltimore Comic-Con or Otakon. I had a short wait. I ended up sharing a table with another guy. He wasn't going to the con. He was living up in Baltimore, and we chatted a bit about Baltimore and food and movies and stuff like that. And for lunch I had the summer rolls, and I had the Mekong Delta noodle soup. And I really like it, but I really need to try something else one of these days, because it's all I seem to get every time I go there. And it's really good. It's an excellent soup, excellent broth, with pork and shrimp. Really good meal. So after Mekong Delta, I walked back to the convention center. I took a quick walk around Artist's Alley. I really didn't see anything that caught my eye. Well, maybe one or two things, but nothing that really inspired me to want to buy or inspired me to stop. And I don't know, there was a certain sameness to a lot of the stuff. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of variety there. So, I don't know, I may have only spent 20 or 30 minutes in Artist's Alley. Then I went upstairs, and I went to a panel on anime's online expansion. And this was kind of a panel with industry people, somebody from Crunchyroll, somebody from Daisuki.net, and they were talking about, and I missed the beginning of the panel, but they were talking about how the distribution of anime has changed with the online aspect, and also they talked a little bit about how manga is not distributed really online in the same way that anime is, because nowadays you can get all kinds of stuff very soon after it airs in Japan, in the United States, online. So it was it was an interesting panel. I stayed till towards the end, and then I moved on. I wanted to get into the panel on World War II in anime, and I did. I didn't realize how packed it would be. I just kind of walked in during the previous panel in that same room, and I'm not sure if there was a line to get in or not, but I got there about 10 minutes before, and I just walked in and took a seat, and nobody stopped me. The staff member who was working that room didn't say anything to me. He just let me walk in. So I stayed in there, and anyway, the room was packed when the guy came in to do the World War II anime panel. They filled up the room. Honestly, I wasn't that crazy about it. The guy was going a little more for, it wasn't quite as academic as I would have liked it to be. He went a little more for presentation, I guess. Pandering to the crowd a little bit, getting them excited. And I think I would have preferred something a little drier, a little less pandering to the crowd. So that ran for an hour, and I don't know, it opened my eyes to a couple other animes I might try, like Hetalia, which I'd heard about, but I've never tried. And it has something, it's influenced by World War II. So after that, I went to another panel. I missed the beginning of it, but not by much. I went to a panel on giant robots and superheroes. And this was in a huge room. The presenter was Crispin Freeman, who I'm not familiar with, but I guess is somebody who writes about this kind of stuff. And he was talking about how in the United States we have superheroes, and in Japan the analogous character would be the giant robot. And he kind of talked about the influence behind these, how Buddhism and Shintoism, I think, were the main influences in Japan, and how they viewed their ideal characters, the giant robots, whereas Judaism and Christianity were the main influences, and to a degree, Judaism and Christianity is what he said, were the main influences in the creation of superheroes, specifically Superman, whose creators were, of course, both Jewish. So it was an interesting panel. There were some problems with the technical, like there was one point where there was a slide where you couldn't see some things because of the contrast or something. There was some problem with the picture, so everything kind of broke down for about 10 minutes while they worked on that. And to a degree, there was a certain amount of pandering to the crowd, and I think that in part this has to do with the fact that the crowd. I'm older than the average crowd. I mean, the average person who attends Otakon is probably more like teenager to 20s, to college student, early 20s, late teens. And the panel was supposed to run for 2 hours. I ended up sticking around for about a little over an hour of it. And, it was interesting, but I just didn't feel like I was getting as much out of it as I wanted to, as I would hoped I would. So after that, I went to, the last thing I did before I went home was I went to a viewing. They were showing some anime, a series that sounded kind of interesting called Hakuoki. They were showing the first 4 episodes, and it's set in the mid-19th century. In the program guide, they said it was going to be subtitled, but when I got to the room, they were airing the dubbed version. So I stuck around for the first episode. I wasn't crazy about it. I'm not sure how much that has to do with the fact that it was dubbed rather than subtitled. But after, at the beginning of the second episode, I decided to take off. I had things to do at home. My one regret for Saturday is that I didn't have anything exciting like the taiko drumming workshop that I had on Friday to go to. I mean, that would have really completed the day. There were some things that I had planned to do, like there was an Indian film that I had thought about going to see, and then I decided not to go, instead to see these panels. And, you win some, you lose some. I mean, who knows? I mean, I think the Indian movie probably would have been good, but I wanted to do something different. So I just took off at about 6:15. I left the convention center. Walked back to my car. I decided not to have dinner in Baltimore. Instead, I drove back closer to where I live. Had dinner at an Indian restaurant, which was quite good. And that was my day. It was a good day. I think Friday was a little better. But I got one more day. And I'm looking forward to it. Otakon, Day 3, and reflections on Otakon. Sunday morning, I once again woke up a little later than I meant to. I drove up to Baltimore. I had breakfast at the farmer's market, which is quite awesome. Both the farmer's market and what I had. If you've never been, it's worth going. It's supposed to be one of the biggest ones on the East Coast, as I understand it, or at least in the Northeast. After having breakfast, doing a little shopping, I dropped stuff off in my car, walked down to the convention center, and I was a little late, but the first thing I did was I went to a panel called An International Game of Telephone. Now, this was hosted by the same guy who hosted one of the panels I went to, I think the only panel I went to on Friday, and that is Charles Dunbar of Study of Anime. I believe his website is studyofanime.com. And so what this was about was kind of the way that Japan and the United States have exchanged ideas and how things that have shown up in anime have worked their way into U.S. films and U.S. pop culture, and things that have started in U.S. pop culture have worked their ways into anime. And I don't have, he talked about, the best examples I can think of are like Star Wars, how there's been Star Wars and even Star Trek mangas, and the way we have made movies of things like Godzilla and things like that started in Japan. But there was a whole series of things, and it kind of was a ping-pong thing going back and forth. So it was an interesting. I missed like the first 20 minutes. I wish I hadn't, because he's a good presenter, and he's very energetic, and I don't feel that he panders to the crowd. He really seems interested in the subject, much more so than he is in getting laughs or getting applause from the audience. And he had visuals too. He had little clips and slides to illustrate stuff. But that was a good presentation. After that, I went to, that ran until about 11. And after that, I went to a panel called I Want to Know More, 30 Years of Books About Anime, Manga, and Otaku. And this was exactly what it sounds like. The guy who ran the panel, Mikhail Kulikov, basically kind of gave us an overview, and this was a very sparsely attended panel. There really wasn't, probably more than 15 people, maybe 20 in a room that could hold probably, 100 or 200. And he kind of gave us an overview of books and the evolution of the books, how study of anime and manga has evolved. It wasn't too detailed. And so he kind of, going all the way back to, I think the first books were in the, this was 30 years. Yeah, that was the whole theme of it. I think the first book was in 1983, and that was by Frederick Schodt, I've heard it pronounced both ways, called Manga, The World of Japanese Comics. And that was the first English language book on comics and anime. And he kind of talked about that and how it's evolved and how there's books about creators and there's books about themes. The only book that I've read is the one by Susan Napier. I think it's called Anime from something to Princess Mononoke. I can't remember. It's something with an A. But So he kind of gave us an overview of a number of books. He recommended a number of books. And it was also for people who were interested in doing their own scholarly work on the subject, which is not the case with me. So that was an interesting presentation, and I found out after the fact that he's a friend of mine, which I didn't know at the time, or even while I was at the show. I didn't find out until later. After that panel, I went straight to the movie room where I'd watched movies before, and this time I saw Flying Swords of Dragon Gate. This was another Chinese Hong Kong film, another one by Sui Hark, who also directed the film I saw the day before, which was the film I saw, Detective D and the Mystery of the Phantom Flame. This time it was, of course, like I said, Flying Swords of Dragon Gate. This one was set, I think, a little more recently. And it was kind of reminded me of a Western, or it was a little hard to follow in places just because there were so many different people involved in it. And you had all these people kind of converging on this one spot where there was supposed to be this town. There was a sandstorm coming, and there was this town that's buried somewhere out in the desert underneath the sand, and there's a 60-year storm. In other words, a storm that comes through every 60 years that uncovers it, and then another storm comes through that recovers it. But there's supposed to be all this gold in the in this buried city, kind of El Dorado-ish town, I guess. But there's a certain amount of animosity between the people who arrive in this place, and it got a little confusing, and I'd really, it would probably bears watching again to see if it all works. There are some things about it that didn't work. There were, traps and things like that, which one minute seemed to be a real concern for people, and then the next minute they're just forgotten, and all of a sudden they just break through them. There are moments where the story just jumps and they just kind of skip over stuff. I don't know if that's because I saw an edited version or not, but it was not my favorite of the movies I saw, but it was fun, and it certainly, I guess you could, there was plenty of fighting in it. There was a number of female characters in it, 4 female characters in it, who played prominent roles. They were outnumbered by the male characters, but still, I thought that was interesting. I hadn't seen that in a Japanese martial arts, adventure type movie before. And really, that was about it for Sunday. That movie let out around 2:30, and 2:30, 2:45, and the convention ended at 3:30. So, and there really wasn't much else to stick around for other than closing ceremonies, so I just headed home after that. Looking back on the convention as a whole, I would say that Friday was definitely my favorite day. I really enjoyed the taiko drumming workshop. I wish there had been something else like that I could have done on Saturday and Sunday. Or at least Saturday. It would have made the day, I don't know, it would have completed the day for me in some ways. Something more interactive. And, there are some interactive things, not all of which I necessarily wanted to get involved in. As with my previous time attending Otakon, I definitely felt like I was, the con was overwhelmingly attended by younger people in their teens or early 20s, which isn't to say there was certainly a number of people who were my age and older and a little younger than me, in their 30s and 40s and 50s and on up. But it definitely seems like a show that the overwhelming majority of the attendees and the spirit of the show seems to cater to the younger audiences. And so for that reason, I feel it's not my favorite show. I did attend this show because I was unable to attend Heroes Con earlier this year. And now also because I'm not going to be able to attend Baltimore Comic Con in a few weeks. And I'd already decided that I'm not going to attend SPX because I'm going to do a trail race that weekend. So this is going to be it for me as far as conventions go. I went to Super Show, Comic Geek Speak Super Show in April, and Otakon in August, and that's going to be it for me for 2013. There's no other big conventions. I think there's another anime convention a little closer to home in November or December, but I'm not sure if I'm going to go to that. And I have some travel to do in November, so it may interfere with that. But so this was my conventions for this year. Hopefully I'll get to more conventions next year. I'll get to Baltimore. I'll get to Heroes Con next year. I'll get to SPX, and hopefully there'll be a Super Show next year. And I've thought about it going to other shows like maybe C2E2 or something like along those lines. But anyway, Otakon was fun. I'm glad I attended. I saw a lot of good films. I saw a lot of entertaining films. I got to attend some good panels. I really enjoyed the taiko drumming workshop. And overall, big thumbs up for Otakon. Okay, that's it for this episode and for Otakon 2013. If you made it this far, then thank you for listening. Comments can be left on the podcast page or my blog, readingforthetrade.blogspot.com, or you can email me at emaildavelevine@yahoo.com, or you can tweet me at Kilmarock.